Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the science of camel's milk. I think what we'll do is let everyone get a few minutes to sign in and good evening, everybody. Welcome to the science of camel's milk. And we were hoping to get a little bit of practice in with this earlier this evening, but due to me coming from Austin all the way back down to San Antonio, we did have some issues as far as getting back here. So we will just give it a couple of minutes here and let everybody join in. I see we got some participants, and don't hesitate to let us know where everybody's from, and would love to hear from you. Hey, Saul, good to see you. Glad you're here. And during this webinar, if you would like, we would love to hear some of your questions, or if there's things that you hear that you would love to get more information on, would love to hear from you. So I like doing things very interactive, and so don't hesitate to chime in. And I've got my lovely wife, Linda, here tonight to help to moderate that. So if there's any questions that she can help out with or to pass along to me, she certainly will. But now that we've got some people on, we'll get started because, you guys are taking time out of your evening to be with me. So I appreciate it. And why don't we do this instead? Let me tell you guys a little bit about why I got interested in camel's milk. I want to say now 5 or 6 years ago, we were in the midst of doing everything that we could to help my son, Nick, heal from the multiple medical issues and digestive issues and gastrointestinal and immune problems that he was dealing with. That was leading him to have a diagnosis of autism. And during that, we had always felt that food was going to be his biggest healer, and it was going to be his medicine. And actually, it was Linda, my wife, who actually came across camel's milk and had read some of the studies and had learned from some of the people that were doing it, and like Christina Adams and Dr. Ruben Yagil, and had found that, hey, there's a potential this could be helpful for children with autism. And that's kind of how we got introduced to it. And we got some, and when we started the frozen raw camel's milk, it was life-changing for our son. He started digesting his food better. He started having better bowel movements. He started eating more foods. He started having more language, better cognition. We ended up doing it for over 2 years consistently. And the gains that we saw never stopped. Well, we even got to the point that not only was he becoming more conversational and started having, being able to tell us everything of his wants and needs, he also started developing even higher level functioning benefits. Like, we started noticing things like empathy, which was amazing. And we weren't doing much of anything else at the time. So we really had to contribute it to the healing that was happening from the camel's milk. And we also saw remorse. Real quick, a story that I love to tell is Nick one night, he was going down the slide and he was on our swing set and didn't want to come inside. And I had told him, being the stern dad, hey, it's time to come in, buddy. You got to come in. It's time for, to get dressed and go to bed. And we were talking later on, and we heard Nick crying. So I jumped up and went and checked on him and said, hey, what's going on? And he said that his heart hurt. And we had never heard anything like this before from Nick. And we said, what do you mean? So I pulled him out of bed and brought him out to the living room where my wife and her mother was. And he said, my heart hurts. And I said, what's going on? Why? And he said, Dad, I said bad words to you earlier, because he was so mad that I had to bring him inside. And I said, buddy, it's okay. But that was true remorse. He felt bad, and it was lasting up until after he had gone to bed. So that's the kind of things that got us sparked to be so interested in the healing benefits and wanting to learn more. So that launched me into learning about what's with this stuff. Why is it that it's doing these things to not only my son? Then I started utilizing it with patients in my practice and started noticing amazing gains even with other kids. So that really got me learning a lot more about the science, which is what we're going to talk about tonight. So let me get that pulled up so that we can get started. Okay. All right, so like I said, this is the science of camel's milk. My name is Barry Smeltzer. I own Healing Provisions down here in San Antonio. And the disclaimer is, yes, this information is for educational purposes only. Discuss anything that you do when it comes to some type of intervention with your medical practitioner prior to initiating. And I'm talking about the science of benefits of camel's milk. It's not, talking so much about the milk or who gets it or where it's from. I really want to talk more right now tonight about why it's so beneficial. Okay, so let's get started. And if you guys can, let me know if you're seeing this okay. All right, so the history of camel's milk dates back to biblical times and again lived in some of the harshest climates. So evolutionary, the history of how camel's milk became what it was is because it has naturally evolved in this harsh climate for so many generations back to biblical times. So that natural evolution has created what we're going to talk about is going on today. So none of what we're talking about in regards to the benefits of camel's milk have anything to do with other than natural selection and natural evolution of this milk. So let's start talking a little bit about the nutritional benefits of camel's milk. One of the things that is so beneficial in regards to camel's milk is that it does have a high amount of vitamins, minerals, amino acids. And one of the things that separates it from cow's milk is that it has a higher amount of vitamin C. And that's significant because that makes the milk itself more acidic. Now, not to the point where like soda, where it's horribly acidic, but enough that the nutrients that get into our stomach don't get broken down by our own stomach acid as much because they're naturally in a more acidic environment. So they actually become more bioavailable. And there are, so things like niacin, which is extremely important for energy production and detoxification in the liver, as well as vitamin C, which is an excellent antioxidant, are higher in camel's milk, 3 times higher in camel's milk for vitamin C. There is lower amounts of vitamin A and riboflavin, which is B2, than bovine milk. And then as far as the B12 amounts. There's studies that kind of show it either way. And I think that's a great point to make, that when we talk about the nutritional benefits of camel's milk, it will vary. Camels that are bred in the Middle East are going to have a slight variant from a standpoint of nutrition than camels that are raised in North America. So I'm basing this upon what is in the literature. So that gives us a base to go on, but it's not going to be drastically different. Here is just, I wanted to show you kind of a comparison of amino acids are proteins. It's the breakdown component of proteins. And these proteins are extremely important because those are the building blocks for so many functions, for muscle growth, for neurons, for cellular components. So to see that they are not only similar, but actually in some of the more important things for cell detoxification, like cysteine, it's actually higher. So I just want to show you that real quick. Minerals, one of the things that is key in regards to mineral benefits of camel's milk over bovine or cow's milk is that it's significantly higher in iron, up to 10 times higher. And that plays such an essential role in so many different biological systems like you see there. Similar, so people are like, well, does it have the same calcium? Because people really do find that milk is one of the major sources of calcium. And it has very similar amounts of both calcium, sodium, magnesium, and potassium. And what you're going to see from me throughout this talk is that everything that I'm discussing is backed by literature, backed by the medical research. And now, granted, vast majority of medical research on camel's milk is done in the Middle East because there camels are as popular, as common as cows are here. So they use it so much more readily than we do here, okay? In the US, in case we do have anybody from outside the US. Other nutritional benefits, the proteins themselves, we just discussed those amino acids. But what I also want to talk about is a very big difference here, and that is the structure of the proteins themselves. There's two types of proteins in camel's milk. There's whey and casein. Similar, same thing as the two types of proteins in cow's milk and breast milk. The significant difference between cow's milk and camel's milk is that camel's milk has a significantly higher amount of lactoferrin, peptidoglycan recognition protein, and other like albumin. Some of the immunoglobulins are much different, but a significant difference that it does not have that cow's milk has, there is no beta lactoglobulins. Now, beta lactoglobulins are what causes what most people have to have a lactose intolerance or to have an issue with being allergic to milk. So there's two types of milk that have no lactoglobulins, and that is camel's milk and breast milk. So when we talk about there being an alternative to breast milk in case women can't breastfeed, camel's milk actually, according to the World Health Organization, is the only suitable substitute to breast milk. But that's, again, worldwide versus in the US. The casein does not have the same structure as cow's milk. It does have beta casein, but it's a different structure, and I'll explain to you why here in a minute. So speaking of that beta casein is present in most mammal milks. The difference, though, is an A1 versus A2 variant. A1 variant, if that protein is not completely broken down by beneficial bacteria like lactobacillus, it can mimic the protein structure of morphine. And when I treat children that are drinking milk like they just, they can't get enough, or if you're an adult and you just, you're every meal, you just have to have that glass of milk, or it's something where you use that as your protein source for the day, you may find that you actually are developing a pseudo addiction to that milk, because if you don't break it down completely, it mimics morphine. A2 milk, which is much less common in the US, but it's in certain breeds of cow called Guernsey or Jersey, but it's also in camel, donkey, and breast milk. Okay, so that's a significant difference, because that protein does not break down into that casomorphin structure. And what I wanted to show you here is that A2 beta casein variant. When you see the actual amino acid chains, there's a difference between these two, A1 and A2, right here at that proline histidine complex. Now, when this protein is broken down to be used by the cells for proteins, if it breaks down at that histidine, instead of having that full chain like it is for the A2, you will end up with beta casomorphin. That's what actually attaches to the opioid receptors in the brain and can lead to an addictive-like quality. Now, in children that I treat that have what I would consider casein addiction, questions I'll ask the parents are, hey, does he have any issues with having a high pain tolerance? Does he have, is he kind of clumsy? Is it hard to get a hold of him? Is he easily distracted? When you call his name, does he always, come to you? And I will say the vast majority of times, those families will tell me, yeah, that's exactly how he is. And I'll say, well, this could be an issue. And then we show them through different studies that they are actually dealing with an addiction to this casomorphin molecule that's not being properly broken down just from drinking milk. So that's one difference, significant difference. How about fats? When you compare camel's milk to cow's milk, there is a lower percentage of short chain fatty acids, but there is a higher percentage of long chain fatty acids and unsaturated fatty acids that are essential for energy production. The short chain fatty acids can sometimes cause issues in regards to breakdown, okay? And they are still important because they do help with cell membrane structure and everything else and energy production, but there's at least that difference in regards to variety as well. Probiotics. What people don't realize is that especially when you drink raw camel's milk, you're actually getting, it's like a probiotic drink. And you're getting significant amounts of lactic acid bacteria that actually inhibits Staph aureus and pathogenic E. coli in the GI tract. And that's shown in the study that is below it. And there's significant amounts of Lactobacillus plantarum, pentosis, and Lactobacillus lactis. Those are all significant studied probiotics that help to heal and reduce leaky gut syndrome. And you're going to see that Lactobacillus lactis actually has another benefit when we start talking about some of the conditions that camel's milk can benefit. Here's some of the literature that goes along with the nutritional benefits. This is where I got some of the information that I sent that I've been sharing with you, okay? Now let's get into some of the medical benefits. One of the reasons I wanted to do this webinar tonight was there are actual studies and there are actual cases where people are utilizing camel's milk as a benefit to heal or to help prevent certain diseases, and it's utilized to be treatment. And that's unheard of, to actually have a milk being utilized as like a medicine. And this isn't something that I'm making up. I use it because I see so many benefits in kids, and I see so many benefits from the GI tract and other things, but this is actually going beyond that. So let's talk about that, okay? And I know I got, 11 or so people. I want to see, don't hesitate to reach out and Give me some feedback. Give me some information. I'd love to hear from you. All right, one of the things that's kind of makes sense that it would be utilized for is inflammatory bowel disease because of those healing proteins and those benefits. What I'm looking at showing you now is camel's milk reduces inflammation, lowers inflammatory cytokines, and improves colonization of that probiotic, Lactobacillus lactis. What that then does is reduces inflammation of actual the cytokines or the inflammatory process that causes inflammatory bowel disease. So that's the literature shows that right below there. Now this was in a rat model, but it definitely has shown that to be beneficial even in humans. So administration of that camel's milk, it mitigated the colonic levels of these two inflammatory cytokines. That actually reduced inflammation and injury to the colon. And we did it through reduction in oxidative stress. Oxidative stress is damage inside the cells. And that's something that we're going to talk about over and over because that is one of the major benefits from an anti-inflammatory standpoint that camel milk provides. All right, camel milk and inflammatory bowel disease. This is the literature that demonstrates a lot of that. So you guys see that this isn't something that, again, is not showing without some scientific basis to it as well. So microfloral changes, therapeutic effects, orally administered, demonstrating efficacy in chronic colitis. That shows that Lactobacillus lactis that is so high in camel's milk actually brings down that inflammatory process in colitis. And then it ameliorates the other inflammatory cytokines in that last study. How does it do it? Now, this is an infographic that actually talks more about leaky gut syndrome, but I like to show it because if you can demonstrate that this is going to help reduce inflammation, it's going to build up that mucosal lining through all those good probiotics, those protective proteins, you're going to get, instead of having where everything starts to leak through and you're getting this immune reaction, it actually then kind of creates this downward spiral to where not only are things sliding through, but then everything starts to come through because of that inflammatory process. And when you do something like camel's milk, what you're doing is you're providing protection from that happening because the actual intestinal wall or intestinal lining is this massive amount of ability to absorb nutrients. And there is all sorts of different folds and little villi and then microvilli on top of them that increases surface area in the gut lining. And when that is spread out, if you were to spread out your intestinal wall and make it flat, the amount of surface area is equivalent to the size of a football field. So that's something that is impressive. The problem, though, is that football field, as you can see in this graphic, is one cell layer thick. So now it's not quite so great because you're like, wow, things could really easily pass through. And what protects it from doing that is actually having that mucosal lining that sits on top of here where all those good probiotics and all your microbiome lives there, as well as your own immune system that is your secretory IgA. Now, one of the questions that we get frequently is, can camel's milk actually be used if you are allergic to milk? And there was a study done by Dr. Yagil, who's one of the people that I looked to when I was first um, doing a lot of the research into camel's milk. And I came across this, and it was done in 2005. And what they actually did was they took children that actually had an allergy to cow's milk, and they had them in a controlled setting in a hospital, hooked up to an IV that they could give epinephrine or Benadryl or what we would consider an EpiPen dose, in case they, when they took some of the camel's milk, had the same reactivity. Something we would never get away with in the US. Now, what happened here or there is that they started giving these children camel's milk, and not only did they not have an allergic reaction, but what they actually did was it showed that they could tolerate being, having hidden exposures of cow's milk and not have that severe allergic reaction. So that was a significant study. And the reason they came up with those, because they don't have those lactoglobulins, and that's what was creating the vast majority of the allergies. But it had such similar properties that it was desensitizing the children to the milk proteins that they were getting such an allergic reaction to. So in addition to that, we're going to talk about the immunoglobulins that are so unique in camel's milk and why they also are creating this downregulation in regards to that allergic reaction. Now, this is something that is actually fairly new. This is a study from 2016, and something that I've been getting into much more is the relationship between our own genes and the environment. And that's the field of epigenetics. Now, epigenetics basically is taking the information from our genomes or from our genes and actually looking into the little pieces that make up the strand that creates the gene. Those are called nucleotides. And each one of those nucleotides is like code in a computer. And what it's coding for are different enzymes. And those enzymes speed up reactions biochemically inside the cell. And when those reactions are sped up, they do the functions that basically make us human. And one of those reactions is antioxidants or detoxification. So it takes something that our body does not consider ourselves and either neutralizes it or renders it inactive so that your body can now get rid of it. Otherwise, those oxidative species or reactive oxidative species can create damage or rust inside the cell, so to speak. And one of the things that camel's milk has been shown to do is not only is it a good antioxidant itself with all of its nutritional vitamins and other antioxidant properties, but what it actually does is it improves our own bodies, our own genes, our own enzymes to work better, to actually make those superoxide dismutase. That's the enzyme that helps to work as such a powerful detoxification and antioxidant, and catalase, which is another powerful antioxidant in our body that we make. It makes it work better. And what happened is that it increases the expression of these antioxidant powerhouse, increasing that significant of reducing the environmental insult that our bodies go through that creates aging, it creates disease and inflammation. And those are some of the most chronic things that our country is dealing with. The other thing that it does, and this is very significant because glutathione is our master detoxifier. And when your body is under stress or is toxic, or you're getting chronic exposures, whether it be through what you breathe, what you drink, or what you eat, your body now has to get rid of those. And our most powerful detoxifier in our body is glutathione. And camel's milk actually improves the ability of our enzyme pathways in our genes to make our most powerful antioxidant. How they found out in this study was they actually gave us a pathogenic E. coli in staph in rats and found that the reason they didn't get sick and get pathogenic from it was that the improvements in this glutathione and SOD downregulated the E. coli and Staph aureus, and it increased the expression of these apoptosis-associated genes. In other words, these are the things that help to kill off the E. coli and the Staph aureus. So significant antimicrobial and antioxidant activity that is improved by drinking camel's milk. So what about immunoglobulins? This is another huge benefit and really one of the major benefits that I see in camel's milk. So what are antibodies? Antibodies are molecules. They're part of our immune system, as part of the adaptive immune system in our body. So what they do is they are sent out when our body is either attacked or there's something in it that is considered foreign. It tags it so that our white blood cells can come through and actually eliminate it or take it out and get us so we can eliminate it through our own ability, whether it be through our gut or through our stool or through our urine, so that we can get it out. And these antibodies are classified as IgM, IgG, and IgE. These antibodies are part of that adaptive arm and work with the innate immune system, which is white blood cells, okay? Camels, however, have unique antibodies. They are called nanobodies. And the amount of antibodies in camel's milk is actually 2 times the amount that are in breast milk. So that smaller shape of the antibodies allows them to reach areas of the body that our own antibodies cannot reach. So think of it from a standpoint of these antibodies are kind of like the stealth molecules that can go through, and instead of them attacking us, they're the ones that actually are helping defend us from these viruses and bacteria, and even parasites. But if you had ones that are even smaller, they can go around to areas, one of the most important being the brain. So there's been literature that has shown that nanobodies can cross the blood-brain barrier. Well, that's incredibly significant because now we know that there is an immune system in the brain, and there are infections or there are microbes that are in the brain that we don't necessarily recognize because our own antibodies don't get there. So it can help to tag, it can help to bring down inflammation, and that's a significant benefit that camel's milk provides on its own. However, that's something that's also been identified by the pharmaceutical industry. So one thing that was shown are nanobodies a big deal? Well, when Merck decides to drop $2.3 billion on nanobody research and development, that tells me that this is a big deal and that the significance should not be can't be overstated, because what they're utilizing it for is to find a synthetic way to make those nanobodies so that they can attach their cancer drugs on top of it so they can get to cancers that are in the brain or are hidden in the body that our own antibodies aren't getting to. So it's significant from a standpoint of it can really be beneficial. But when we think about it from a standpoint of where do they come from, they come from camels. And we're getting that naturally just by drinking the milk. So I find that to be very significant. What is the difference between our own antibodies and antibodies? How does that, it's smaller, I don't get it. The difference is that there are structure of our own antibodies is this Y-shaped, comprised of heavy and light chain proteins. So when we look at the differences, you can see it kind of visually now, that between the nanobody, which you can see on the left here, is significantly smaller when you look at the protein structure of our own antibodies. So when you think of this going through and trying to get to little crevices inside our body, and you see this guy going in, this one's going to be able to attach to a lot more, which is going to recruit that white blood cell to come through and bring that antigen or that virus, you know, and get rid of it, versus what our own antibodies can't even see. So since those nanobodies are up to 10 times smaller, they can penetrate deeper into the tissue. They are a part of the IgG class of antibodies. And what they do show is that they've been able to treat things like viral, bacteria, and mycoplasma infections. Now, those are all things that our own modern medicine is having a really tough time keeping up with. And if we can do something that will be natural, but still have that benefit, that is something that you just can't get through modern medicine. And I find that chronic infections, it leads to chronic inflammation, which leads to autoimmunity. And if we can head that off before it gets to that point, we can make significant improvements in people's health. What other medical benefits? These are actually specific viruses, bacteria, and even some parasitic infections that can be, I wouldn't say eradicated by camel's milk alone if you are infected with these, but they will help be a significant adjunct to any treatment that you would use, so that you may not have to go with an antibiotic, or you could do something that's more herbal to clear out what would otherwise be required to use an antibiotic for. So one study that was really interesting was they compared the efficacy of camel's milk to eliminating rotavirus versus the prophylaxis of the rotavirus vaccine, and found that camel's milk was actually more effective at preventing rotavirus infection than the rotavirus vaccine. So that shows you from an antiviral standpoint that it is very effective. It also has helped patients that had hepatitis C infections to not have to be on medications to eliminate it. Or it worked to help the medication so it was more effective, so you didn't have as many side effects. It has also been shown to be beneficial in influenza, mycoplasma infections. One of the most common that I see is mycoplasma pneumoniae, and I see that chronically in both adults and kids. And I do believe that the mycoplasma hides, and our own antibodies can't get to it. So therefore, we're not getting complete elimination, and therefore it can come back. So you get this waxing and waning chronic infection. Whereas the nanobodies can actually get to it, identify it, so then our body can eliminate it properly. Same thing with Salmonella and E. coli, like we showed, it actually brought down their ability to infect our body because they improved our own body's ability to get rid of it. And here's some of the immunological and antimicrobial studies that demonstrate that. How about diabetes? Diabetes is obviously, it's an epidemic in our country. But we have access to all sorts of different medications, including insulin, but not everywhere in the world do they have access to whether it be insulin or drugs that help improve insulin resistance, things like that. So what they have found for people that are diabetic, even type 1, they are able to drink camel's milk. And since it has such a high amount of insulin in it, they actually can utilize that as their source of insulin versus having to inject it. Now, what's the difference between cow and camel's insulin? Nothing. Both of them have a similar amount of cow's milk, and some people actually do drink cow's milk to help stabilize their blood sugars. The difference is just the same difference as far as the nutrients. Insulin in camel's milk is in a more acidic base because of those high amounts of vitamin C. So then the bioavailability of that insulin is much higher because it doesn't get broken down by the gastric acid. And that allows it to pass through into the intestines and into the bloodstream much more available. Another study demonstrated, especially in type 1 diabetics, which does tend to affect children more, that camel milk consumption is useful as an adjunct to parenteral insulin. So those children or those patients who maybe have to be on higher amounts of insulin because they don't produce insulin are finding they don't have to be on as much just by drinking camel's milk. So that is an amazing way to use a food as a medicine. It also has effects even in cardiovascular disease. Fermented camel's milk, or a kefir, it actually contains an exopeptidase that cleaves certain peptide substrates that have ACE inhibitory effects. What the heck does that mean? Basically, instead of needing to be on a high blood pressure medication called an ACE inhibitor, camel's milk, when it's fermented, actually acts like an ACE inhibitor. And that then dilates and reduces some of the pressure on the peripheral vasculature, which then forces the heart to squeeze harder, which leads to higher blood pressure. So again, it mimics what they are doing with the medication. And the final thing that we want to talk about tonight is heart disease. Heart disease, using a milk to help treat heart disease, what they're showing in this study that was done just this year was that heart disease, there's a cardioprotective effect of camel's milk on that oxidative stress. We talked about that before. Not only just from a nutritional standpoint, but from from the GI disease in Crohn's and colitis. So it actually it reduces the oxidative stress that can cause heart disease or cause damage in the heart, cardiotoxicity. That leads to hypoxia, then there's more damage and that leads to a heart attack. Now, does that mean if you have heart disease, you can just drink camel's milk and not have to be on anything else? No. But what it can do is either reduce a person who's either had a heart attack or is at risk for a heart attack from having to be on more medication. And for people who are wanting to prevent heart disease, it improves the antioxidant effect that protects the heart from getting damaged. So all of which are a huge benefit when it comes to the overall health. And I keep coming back to this, but this is done by a food. And that's one of the biggest reasons why I feel that studies need to start happening here. And we need to start showing not only the families and the people who are drinking it the benefits, but the medical community as well needs to start learning that these foods can be used like medicines, which have a much safer profile, hardly any side effects, and then treats the whole person so that not only are they getting GI, immune, anti-inflammatory, reduction in blood sugar levels, improvements in heart disease, all by just drinking a milk. So that's where I become so passionate about this. Not only because of my son's story, but because I really feel that it's what medicine should be working towards. Finding natural ways to prevent diseases that we end up having to treat so commonly in our country. So with that, that's the end of the slideshow. But it looks like we do have some questions. And if there's anyone else that has a question, if they're from the actual presentation, don't hesitate to type it in, and we'll talk a little bit more about it as well. So one of the questions that we had was, does camel milk have any binding properties such as heavy metals or mycotoxins? And the answer to that is not in the literature at this time. The binding properties from a chelation standpoint haven't been really demonstrated. But what I will say is that our own body's natural ability to detoxify these things starts with glutathione, superoxide dismutase, and catalase, all three of which are improved in function by camel's milk. So not directly does it help with binding heavy metals, but indirectly it improves our own body's ability. Same thing will be said about mycotoxins, and I would even say chemical toxicity as well, is that if we can do something that improves our own body's ability to detoxify these things, that raises our ability to tolerate what our toxic world is sending at us. So not only then we can start working on reduction of exposure, but now we're actually improving ability, and that's going to lead to many improvements in chronic toxic diseases, chronic inflammation. And that leads to so many types of symptoms that people end up with diagnoses like chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, even autoimmune diseases, because that chronic inflammation leads to autoimmune like MS and Sjogren's and ankylosing spondylitis and lupus. So not to say that it would prevent it. None of what I'm saying is trying to make a claim that a food's going to prevent disease, but it does help improve our own body's ability to get rid of that. Okay. And I did have another question from a person earlier in the day, and let me pull that one up. Give me just 1 second here. Here it is. So question is that this is a mom, and her question is, says, I breastfeed my 13-month-old son with multiple food allergies and intolerances. I personally have leaky gut and gluten intolerance. We are on a total elimination diet of approximately 15 foods, and we are successfully controlling the symptoms with this approach. We are unable to add any other foods into our diet, so I thought I would try to heal my gut with camel's milk and have my son receive the benefits via breast milk. I eventually want to have him trial it too, but not for another 3 to 4 weeks. I recently started a camel milk trial last Wednesday, starting with a half teaspoon. I tolerated it with no changes for 2 days. So the third day, I increased it to 1 teaspoon, and I have noticed die-off symptoms. Now, what I mean by die-off symptoms are basically stating that for whatever reason, whether it be the immunoglobulins or the proteins or the probiotics, it is starting to kill some of the bacteria in our microbiome that maybe shouldn't have been there or were overgrown to clear space for good probiotics to colonize. So her experience was headaches, cold flu-like symptoms, runny nose. And today she said, I'm going to go back to a half teaspoon and see if it decreases these symptoms. Her question is my son receiving my die-off detox through my breast milk? I'm going to finish all the questions. Are there any concerns for this? Since he is exposed to the camel milk via my breast milk, is he currently experiencing die-off symptoms too, or will he go through his own set when he trials it directly? I would like to minimize the suffering and make sure my breast milk is not causing any harm. Malia, that's a great question, great set of questions. That's exactly what this webinar is for. The first question was, is my son receiving the die-off detox through my breast milk? And the answer to that is no. When you experience die-off, that's mostly some of the metabolites that you are getting through the gut lining. And most of that's actually staying in that gut lining, and that's where a lot of the symptoms in the gut come from. Now, when you're talking about having issues as far as headache and flu-like symptoms, you may be getting minute amounts that are systemic that are causing some of those symptoms, but more so it's the signaling from the gut to the brain, oh, we don't feel good. So I don't feel that that is a systemic, issue in regards to the actual die-off itself. So I would not say that that is a concern. Since he's exposed to the camel milk, and is he currently experiencing die-off symptoms too? There is always that small amount, but with the amount that you're taking of a half a teaspoon, you're not getting enough to even satisfy getting through your system, let alone into your breast milk. Now, if you were getting up to the 3 to 6 ounces or even a half a pint, 8 ounces, then yeah, he's going to start getting some of the nutrients and also the nanobodies and immunoglobulins, no different than he's getting the immunoglobulins from your breast milk. And from that standpoint, you might get some die-off symptoms, but it would really mean that he had need for having some die-off symptoms. He had some issues as far as having an imbalance of flora, even though he's strictly breastfed. Any child, especially if they were a cesarean section, they're not going to get the benefit of that vaginal flora. So they're going to have some flora that's not going to be specifically for their gut. It's actually from the skin. And that can lead to imbalances. Now, if he was a vaginal birth, but say he had some diarrhea, or for some reason you had to have antibiotics, or he had to have antibiotics, that too can create that imbalance. And that imbalance can then lead to that die-off that he'd be getting from the camel's milk. He might see it. Now, the best way to do this, if you were going to adjunct with a little bit of camel's milk, is start slow. Just like you're doing, go with a half teaspoon. For him, you could do a drop on his tongue. And that allows you to gain confidence that the more that he tolerates and the more that he doesn't react, the better he's going to tolerate more. And you're going to have the confidence that giving him more isn't going to cause more issues. When it comes to minimizing his suffering, that's what I would do. I've had moms start off with a drop on the skin, just to make sure that they didn't have some type of IgE reaction to it or an allergy to it. And that's fine. You go as slow as you feel is necessary and let that gauge how you go up. But there's no magic to this. There's no set dosing schedule. It's a food. So go with your gut and start slow and go up slow. And then as he tolerates it, you can give him more. In regards to your die-off symptoms, with a teaspoon and getting that kind of reaction, first of all, I'd want to know if when you go back or you stop, did it go away? Because one of the things that could be happening is not necessarily a gut die-off, but if you're getting nanobodies into your system and those nanobodies are identifying chronic infections, your body is going to react like you're infected. So even something as silly as like the flu, which maybe was lingering and wasn't causing an your body wasn't identifying it, the nanobodies may have tagged it so that your own immune system could recognize it. So that's something that could be even just with that teaspoon. The protective proteins that have the antimicrobial effects, typically you need to get into the ounces, whether it be 3 to 6 ounces. I've had patients that needed to go up to 8, even 16 ounces to feel like they're getting any benefit. But I've seen amazing benefits when you get up into that, because I've had patients who haven't gained weight in a year because of malabsorption, gained 3 or 4 pounds in months. So hopefully that answers her question. Next question is there any literature or do I have any clinical experience with camel's milk addressing mycoplasma aside from pneumonia? And the answer to that is not from a standpoint of literature. The literature is very based on what was happening more in those countries, especially the Middle East. So mycoplasma in general does get benefited, but other than the pneumonia, that was the one that I saw. I did not see any other specific species, but I would not discount that it would have a similar benefit with those. Okay. Let's see here. So another question that we got was, can camel milk help with asthma? And it's a great question because you would think that maybe with its anti-inflammatory benefits, it would. And the answer to that would be, I would say what it would do is it would help reduce the inflammation in general because it's helping with gut inflammation, which has that indirect effect on body inflammation. But more significantly, what I think it would do is it would actually reduce some of the triggers that maybe was inducing that asthma in the first place. And many chronic infections, mycoplasma pneumonia being one of them, can be a trigger for chronic asthma. The other thing that it does is it has those nanobodies, which then kind of spread throughout the body and can help tamp down some of that allergic reactivity and chronic inflammation that then kind of disperses throughout the body. And then whatever allergen comes in, you end up with a higher reactivity to it. So the answer to that is I would not seen anything in the literature that directly says it actually helps with asthma. I would love to see it, but indirectly, I would be able to make an inference that, yeah, it does. Okay. Let's see, do we have any more? Okay. Well, at this point then, I really appreciate everybody and thank you so much for staying with us. Now, the other thing that you can do, we do have another person here. Let's see. Lena, it looks like you raised your hand. Did you have a question? You can type it in and I'm happy to answer. While you're doing that, I actually want to let everybody know that the information from this webinar is going to be posted on our YouTube channel, which is Healing Provisions, but also, which is even more exciting, that we are actually starting a Facebook group that is dedicated to the science of camel's milk. And that is something, if you go on to Facebook, you can actually search, put in the science of camel's milk, and there we can start, because there's already so many of the studies that we discussed tonight. Linda did such a great job in putting all of those into the file section and document section. So if there's any of those that you wanted to see in more detail, you can actually get benefit by looking them up there. And the search in Facebook is the science of camel's milk. Okay. So the question by Lena is great question. And it's something that I have a lot of clinical experience with. There's not much literature on yet. And that is, can camel's milk help with pandas and PANS? Now, pandas, if people who don't know, is a pediatric autoimmune disease that is a neuropsychiatric disease associated with strep. And that's kind of the acronym is pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric disease associated with strep. Now, it has another acronym because not always is it strep that's the trigger. So then there's the pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric syndrome, and that could be triggered by anything from viruses to mycoplasma to bacteria. What the correlation is that the body is either colonized or infected by one of these bacteria or viruses, and the immune system attacks it, maybe gets rid of the infection. But what ends up happening is the immune system kind of goes into PTSD mode. And every time that somebody, that child or that person gets any exposure or their own bacteria, strep, they have this amazing, this huge neuroinflammatory autoimmune reaction that causes so many behaviors, very rigid, very OCD. I have children that are self-abusive. I have one little guy who literally runs himself into a wall or bangs his head. And that's something that when I did a presentation at the Autism Education Summit in Dallas just a month ago, I actually highlighted that case because he's a 3-year-old little guy that we had confirmed that he had a autoimmune reactivity, was never confirmed to be strep, even though we suspected it, but he actually had herpes simplex, so like the cold sore virus. And so he would be more on that PANS spectrum. And the parents were wanting to treat it naturally. They weren't wanting to do antibiotics, and they didn't know if it was even going to work anyway. So we did a trial of Camel's milk. And this was a child that he was hitting his head so hard, he was getting bruises. And just after one day, they completely stopped 100%. He started interacting again. He started being affectionate again. And the parents could not believe that it was that simple or that quick. So they gave him more. They gave him some the next day and the day after that. And he continued to show benefit. Now, what happened is that with pandas and with any autoimmune disease, it does require other modalities. You've got to hit it from multiple angles and start working on the actual virus. You got to start working on the immune system. But that Camel's milk leveled that playing field to such a degree, it brought down so much inflammation that even at his worst flares now, they are a far cry from what he used to be as a normal behavioral baseline before. So that example, I have 2 others that have had similar results, not quite that dramatic, but improvements. So to answer your question, Lena, yes, I do feel that it will benefit the children that maybe have that autoimmune reactivity. Question, raw versus pasteurized. Okay, this question comes up a lot, and it's something I actually wrote a letter on, and it'll be in the Science of Camel's Milk. So you'll be able to see kind of my reasoning from the literature. And the literature demonstrates, and Dr. Yagil also concurs that there is a significant drop in the benefits of camel's milk when it's been pasteurized. So what's the difference? Well, when you pasteurize something, you heat it to a certain degree to make sure that any pathogenic bacteria is killed off. Well, when you're talking about camel's milk, you're also killing off all that beneficial bacteria, and it denatures those nanobodies. So you're actually going to get less effect from the nanobodies, which is so important for the healing. The things that won't be denatured as much are the proteins. And even some of the good proteins, though, the chemical structure of them, when it gets to a certain heat, what they say, it basically changes the chemical structure so that they don't work as well when it comes to the antimicrobial effects or the gut healing effects. So even there, it does limit it somewhat. But one of the things that does stay is that a lot of the nutrients, so the B vitamins, the C, so a lot of those tend to not be as broken down, depending on whether it's a low heat versus high heat. And there are differences there. That's something you can look up. So my answer to that is, when you pasteurize camel's milk, I still think that it's a great milk, and it's very beneficial because what it doesn't have in it, especially the lactoglobulins and the beta casein that causes the addiction issues. But what you will be lacking is some of the real healing benefits that you would get from raw. That's the best source. You asked what's the best source. I personally believe that raw milk, whether it be frozen or fresh, is your best source from a healing perspective. That's where most of the literature states that you're going to get the benefits, because that's what gives you the most pure form of the nanobodies, the proteins, and the nutrients themselves. Recommended dosing, that's all over the board. Dosing depends on too many factors to make any recommendations at this point. That's something that I do on an individual basis. And companies, I don't recommend companies. I don't advocate. I give you criteria to ask the farmers or ask the distributors. Let them know, what are their camels feeding? What are they feeding the camels? How are the camels treated? What are they getting that could be a food sensitivity to yourself or to your child? Because if it's getting into the camels, probably getting into the milk, which means that your child or you may be ingesting something that you could be sensitive to. Kind of think in the same vein as breast milk, okay? And I'm not going to get into which one we drank, and that's something that it's do your research. This is where I'll give you guys the homework. I'll give you the tools, but I want you to do the homework. And what I always tell so many of our families is do your homework, learn about it, learn what questions to ask. I just gave you those questions, then trust your gut. Okay? And does anybody else have any questions or comments? Otherwise, I just want to say thank you. Thanks for staying. Thanks for hanging in there. This has been such a great time, and we will be doing this on a regular basis. So we will put out information. We'll put out when we'll be doing our next one, whether it is through Facebook or through our website. We did have one more question real quick on my thoughts on powdered milk. The literature doesn't really go into it, and there is a lot of unknowns, and I really would defer from a standpoint of benefit until we get the something that is more concrete. There are concerns in regards to the type of the way that the spraying is done and the way that it's dried, and I will kind of just leave it at that, because anytime that you process something, you're going to lose some of that benefit. So the raw, to me, is always going to be your best benefit. But if you aren't having access to that raw, then you can start looking into these other possibilities. And that's something that once I get a little bit more from an information standpoint, or there's literature that demonstrates the differences in what's the positives and negatives, I'll be more public about it. Next question, I should say. Is raw camel milk beneficial for a child with MTHFR and ADD symptoms? There's no doubt in my mind that it's beneficial for MTHFR. And that kind of goes back into the epigenetics question. And that could be an entire webinar we could do on the epigenetics and camel's milk. Okay, it sounds like a good idea. The benefits with a child with MTHFR is that a child with MTHFR is going to have a tough time if you kind of go through the whole pathway of making glutathione. Well, we just talked about how camel's milk improves the body's ability to make glutathione. So there's a direct effect of how it could improve that. ADD symptoms, my question for ADD is the same question I have for autism. Why? Why is the child having ADD symptoms? Is it inflammation? Is it allergy? Is it lack of absorption? Is it malnutrition? That's the stuff that I do on a daily basis, is identify those causes, identify those triggers. That way, then we can address them for what they are. Because to me, autism, ADD, those are checklist diagnoses that will basically explain what's happening downstream. What we look for and what I look for is, why is it happening in the first place? So that would be my answer to that. Question is, what is the Facebook group name? The Science of Camel's Milk. So if you look that up, you can ask to be joined, and they'll probably be a series of things that you'll look through and be able to get added. Okay. And Linda just put that on there too. Okay. Another question. All right. So, all right, people are starting to get more questions. I love it. All right. Are there any types of supplements or interventions that you recommend avoiding alongside CM? No, not really, because camel's milk is going to help with inflammation. It's a great antioxidant. So things that I would say you probably don't need as much is you're not going to need as much to try and heal the gut, because camel's milk can actually be that intervention. And what I mean by that is a lot of people use supplements like glutamine. They'll use N-acetylcysteine. They'll do branched amino acids. And they're doing all these supplements trying to get better gut healing and better absorption. And camel's milk can actually hit multiple stones or multiple targets, with one intervention. And that's where healing with a food provides those benefits that we don't even know. And it's still coming together. So, yeah, I don't really find that there's anything specific that I would say avoid. So if there's something that you have a specific question on, like, hey, should we avoid this? I can probably give you a little more specific answer. Okay. Linda did make a good comment, though, that it is good to avoid other animal dairy products while consuming camel's milk. I do agree with that, because you are going to be counteracting the benefits of what you're getting from a healing proteins, the lactoglobulin or the lactoferrin and lactoperoxidase, and you might be creating inflammation while you're trying to reduce it with the camel's milk. So I guess that would be one thing I would say is you would definitely want to avoid things that are inflammatory. So gluten, dairy, soy, artificial colors, artificial flavorings, MSG. So those are all things I would definitely agree that you'd want to avoid. You mentioned, Michael, you mentioned minimal side effects from CM, notable possible side effects, die-off. And what I mean by that is that's why I always tell patients to start slow. Because if your body is either fighting a chronic infection or it's got a massive amount of imbalance, you could get some of that, the antimicrobial properties of the camel's milk, killing off some of that overgrowth. And that can lead to diarrhea, bloating, like the other lady had mentioned, systemic effects like headaches, fatigue, foggy brain temporarily. Not that it's common, and it's not common with my patients because we go over all of that beforehand. And we talk about starting slow. And we talk about if you start having symptoms to stay there or back off a little bit to allow your body to accommodate. One of the questions was here, mixing it in. Here, I think the question was, can you mix it with almond milk? Yeah, absolutely. This is a food. So, you can, especially if it's a taste issue or a problem with that, you can absolutely mix camel's milk with almond milk, coconut milk, cashew milk, macadamia nut milk. I mean, these are all things that can be helpful. We can put a little dairy-free chocolate milk in it. That all, especially for kids, can make it more palatable to get them the benefits of it. Let's see here. Any interaction concerns with camel's milk and specific probiotic strains or colostrum? Not really, because again, they're all working together. Probiotic strains, if you have, where you adding a ton of probiotics or you're adding, now I would not mix cow colostrum with camel's milk, because again, you're getting that kind of tug of war between the two. But if you were to take like camel's colostrum, now you're talking about golden milk, because you're getting a high density of immunoglobulins and fats and all of the good stuff from it. And so no, not from a specific probiotic strains. If you're doing probiotics with the camel's milk, though, you're probably going to increase your incidence of die-off. Do you find that it needs to be mixed? I.e., does it have a strong flavor? No. Actually, most of the people that started tell us it tastes like 2%. It does sometimes have a little bit of a salty aftertaste depending on what the camels were eating. And some people do find that that's a little bit distasteful. But for the vast majority of it, people usually start mixing it just because they're afraid and they're not used to something that's not cow's milk. So they'll start with that. And then afterwards they will say, well, I didn't even bother anymore. It's fine. I don't have any issues with it. So it doesn't really have a strong flavor. It does taste like milk. Let me see, is there another question over here? Yes, another one is, okay, so we have that. So we answered those. What forms? We got that answered. Okay, so in regards to the Facebook group, I know Linda can help with that. And like she already did, she's also talking about the camel's milk itself. It does have a slight saltiness at the end, but tastes like milk. You can mix it in smoothies, yogurt, non-dairy chocolate, alternative milks, vanilla extract, honey. You can make it into popsicles even. And so Saul did find the group. So Donna, if you're still looking, the science of camel's milk. Okay. All right. Oh, and Linda just put up the link to it. So that'll help too, guys. I think at this point, we've got everybody's questions answered. I just want to say thank you again. And I look forward to interacting with everybody again. We'll do this soon. And if there's any questions, you can always set it up to ask us on the Science of Camel's Milk Facebook page, and we'll get that answered as well. Same thing with the donkey milk. We can answer that when we get to the camel's milk board, okay? All right, guys, thank you so much and appreciate your time. Thank you.